Well, you all voted, and between Ratchet and Clank Continued and the Sonic Advance series, it's clear to me that, like, all 200 of you that voted, that Sonic Advance 1, 2, Battle, and Sonic Advance 3 are what you all want to see. I've talked about how when going into YouTube I had a grand plan for reviews which started with the Sly Trilogy, all 6 Jack games, the first 5 Ratchet games, but where I diverged from that plan would be in between Size Matters and Thieves in Time, since that was when I intended to cover the classic Sonic series. However, thanks to the delays that happened for the OG Sly 2 review, the Jack 2 review, and the Ratchet 1 review, I was behind schedule, so I put up a poll if people wanted to see classic Sonic or Sly 4, and I don't think I need to spend too much time talking about how the outcome of that was, since it should be obvious. Behind the scenes, I've been thinking of talking about Sonic for a while, whether it be the classic games, fan games, what have you. But all those topics are being covered right now, so I figured I'd throw my hat into the ring with the Sonic Advance series released on the Game Boy Advance in the early to mid 2000s. I have a bit of an interesting perspective on the series, seeing as nostalgia bias seems to be an ongoing war between different factions of the Sonic fan base, which is a can of worms I'd rather not put my hands into. However, I just want to say that going forward, I don't really have some kind of allegiance to any specific Sonic playstyle, seeing as my introduction to the series was via 2004's Sonic Mega Collection Plus, where I had access to the classic titles that started it all back in the early to mid 90s on the Sega Genesis, among other classic titles like Comic Zone or The Ooze. However, around then I was also introduced to 3D Sonic titles via 2005 Shadow the Hedgehog. So needless to say, I have seen it all when growing up playing these games, and as such, I'm likely to be open to anything they try as long as it's good. I don't want to spend too much time talking about how I got into the series though, since I think it's better saved for the inevitable Sonic 1 review. What I will say is that amongst the long list of Sonic variations I'd been exposed to, the Advance series was one of them, since I got Advance 3 at a local Best Buy and Advance 1 for Christmas of 2006, I believe. I didn't play Battle until 2008 and Advance 2 until 2013, so make of that what you will. Now that the intro is all said and done, let's get into the review. By the way, since you've probably heard the story of why Sonic ended up on Nintendo consoles, I'm just gonna skip that part, and skip the incredible minimalistic story, and just get with the gameplay. With each passing classic Sonic game, they added more and more to the gameplay with more and more characters to come, all of which having defining abilities to differentiate them from Sonic. So let's start with Sonic himself and work our way through all the gameplay styles in the game. Sonic's gameplay is an incredibly faithful recreation of what made the Genesis games work so well. It's not exactly the same, but it's really close. Starting with his abilities, as expected, he can kill enemies by jumping on them, and with that, you can do the Badneck bounce, which was a carryover from the classic series. What it is that by hitting an enemy from a really high altitude, you can send Sonic or any other character flying into the air. He also, alongside Amy, can grind on rails, which honestly adds nothing to the game and is really wonky, seeing as you can only grind on them if you get on from the very top, which makes no sense. However, they don't do any do or die segments with this, so it doesn't really matter, it's just kind of there to be gimmicky. Pressing the jump button twice will activate the Insta Shield from Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and I always enjoy using it, seeing as you can land hits from a further distance. Not a huge distance, mind you, but the range increase is good enough for me to give this mechanic an A+. As an attack, Sonic can do a slide kick, and if you press the jump button, he'll do a backflip. Next up, there are 2 ways to increase speed from a standstill. If you mash the D-pad left or right in mid-air, Sonic will do an air dash to pick up some speed, although it leaves you vulnerable to attack, so I wouldn't recommend it over the other method, the spin dash, first introduced in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and it functions the same way. Come to a stop and press down the D-pad and mash the jump button, let go and Sonic will go flying, which is good for going up a hill quickly if you don't have enough momentum to make your way up. Like I said earlier, this game is not one-to-one with the Genesis games, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's an attempt that I think worked pretty well. As long as it does that, I'm satisfied. Like, look at Sonic 4 Episode 1. That game sucks so much because, accurate physics or not, the game just isn't fun to play, with some really piss-poor level design. So anyway, I think that covers Sonic. He's probably my favorite playstyle in the game, and the one I'm most likely to replay on a revisit of Sonic Advance. The next character will be Tails, who made his debut in Sonic 2. His abilities are pretty much the same as Sonic. Literally, for the most part, Tails and Knuckles are basically the same with a few new things thrown in. The thing that makes Tails unique from Sonic would be his ability to fly to reach places Sonic cannot. And trust me, this is incredibly useful for a reason to come up later. His attack is using his tails to swipe enemies away, which is all fine and good, but beyond that, his playthrough is largely the same, seeing as he can spin dash and kill enemies by jumping on them, etc. Knuckles the Echidna from Sonic 3 is essentially the same deal. His defining feature is that he can glide and climb walls to reach higher places and power-ups, and he's probably my least favorite character to play as in this game. I'm guessing that the reason is because of how samey he is in comparison to Sonic and Tails. Yeah, he can glide and climb walls, which is fine. However, gliding and climbing walls is basically the same kind of exploration that Tails can do, and I find flying more fun and rewarding than climbing is. He plays fine, it's just that by the third playthrough these levels can tend to feel less interesting. Also not a fan of how he can't climb into springs from underneath them, but that's just a nitpick. Unique to him are his fist attack, which aren't too reliable from my experience, but hey, it works well on certain bosses, so I can't complain. However, the new character introduced to the 2D roster would be Amy Rose. Well, she didn't really debut in this game. Amy first appeared in Sonic CD, and has been playable in the spin-offs leading up to this game like the Sonic the Fighters games or Sonic R, as well as being a principal character in Sonic Adventure. Okay, my point is that this is her first time being a playable 2D Sonic character. With Amy, as opposed to making Sonic with another ability, which works just fine, they decided to adapt her gameplay from Sonic Adventure and put it in the 2D realm, and I'm going to be honest and say that I find her playstyle to be the second best behind Sonic. It feels really different since you have to take your time with the platforming and obstacles, as well as having to be more careful with the combat since Amy can't roll into a ball. Most of the time. She can't spin dash or anything like that, and she uses her hammer to attack. Despite being incredibly basic combat, it's really satisfying to get it right and bounce off of a ring box and go skyrocketing into the air. Amy has a ton of abilities at her disposal, some of which I didn't even know about to this playthrough. Like when falling down, you can hold the attack button down and she'll spin her hammer around, or how she has the ability to dash for a brief increase in speed. But hitting the attack button during this will cause her to die, which is also an attack. A very useful ability, and one of my favorites of them all, is that when at a standstill, she can do a high jump by holding down on the attack button. This is very important for platforming since without it you have a much harder time. Also, by hitting a spring with the hammer you can go much further, which is useful in many areas, which the other characters, to my knowledge, have nothing similar to that. So if it wasn't clear, I really enjoy her playthrough since it's much more difficult and feels like a whole new experience as opposed to more of the same. And that leads me to the level design in Sonic Advance, and you know, this is where my problem with the game kind of begins. I enjoy Sonic Advance and all, but the level design is not the greatest. I think Ice Mountain, Secret Base, and Casino Paradise are all really enjoyable levels as all the characters, since these levels feature a wide variety of multiple pathways to keep replays interesting. Ice Paradise especially, seeing it's my favorite zone in the entire game. The entire bottom section is covered in water, but if you're skilled enough, you can take the top path as any character to completely avoid it, for the most part. It reminds me of Aquatic Ruin Zone from Sonic 2, which is the exact same thing, and that's the kind of thing I love to see in Sonic games. Casino Paradise is alright as well, seeing how complex it is, although if I'm honest, the gimmicks tend to get old for me after a while, seeing as it is rather samey. Secret Base can feel a bit cluttered with how many things are on screen at once, but that has much more to do with the GBA screen resolution as opposed to the stage itself, so it does not take away from the great level design. Neo Green Hill Zone is also relatively well designed with many secrets to find, which is a staple of classic Sonic design. However, I'm not a fan of the abundance of dash pads to make boring stretches of nothing like this go by in no time, which is cheap design. The levels I really don't like are 1. Angel Island, since there are plenty of beginner's traps, and the levels are pretty long. Sonic Advance should take you about an hour to an hour and a half to beat, and most of that time is spent in the latter half of the game since these levels are both like 4.5 minutes long, which for a 2D Sonic level is far too long. A good range would be about 1 to 2.5 minutes. That leads to the next zone I don't like, Egg Rocket and Cosmic Angel, both of which are basically the two acts of Zone 6. I hate Egg Rocket. To sum up what's wrong with it, most of the level is spent climbing up as opposed to traveling to the right, which is incredibly cumbersome. The level has many fake out moments too that lead to your death since the screen locks all throughout the stage, and the camera angles are just terrible. And the level has a fetish for spikes that come out of the ground. The enemy placement as well is really annoying since you're running into shit left and right. You're also on a time limit the whole time, but that doesn't get in the way too much. This level used to really kick my ass, however with each passing playthrough it gets easier, albeit really boring at this point. Cosmic Angel being slightly better, but suffers from visibility issues like nothing else, with a very bland aesthetic and moments that are tough to foresee thanks to how zoomed in the game is. So all in all, I enjoy 3 of the 6 zones, and I'm indifferent on one of them and I don't like the last 2. This is why playing Sonic Advance is kind of tiring to me. I enjoy it for one playthrough every now and again, however completing this game is where it gets really exhausting. Before we get to that though, let's talk about boss battles. They're your typical Sonic battle, hit him 8 times then he dies. Most of the time it's pretty easy, although I will note that there is a varying amount of difficulty between characters. Like I had a much easier time with the 3rd boss as Sonic than anyone else, and a way easier time with the 4th boss as Amy than I did as Sonic since the struggle to get air is much more present with him than the other characters. The same goes for all the rest of the bunch. Still though, on the whole, they're nothing worth writing home about, just like the classic games. The final boss in the X Zone, however, is a load of barbecued balls. I can't say it's particularly complex. I mean, basically, Eggman's in this awkward looking mech that has a few different attacks that he uses at complete random with minimal telegraphing to know ahead of time what he's gonna do, and then being able to prepare accordingly. With a character like Amy, this can be a complete pain, since sometimes it just feels like you do nothing except take hits. Honestly, to beat him as Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, I just abused the invincibility frames and tried to get as many hits in as possible. and that's not what I call satisfying or rewarding design, that's just plain BS. However, I do like how the other bosses here are throwbacks to Sonic 1 and 2's first boss. Also, am I the only one who was confused by the random Metal Knuckles encounter during Angel Island Act 2? That kinda came out of nowhere in my opinion, since the story in this game is practically non-existent, so no build-up or payoff there. Now then, how is Sonic advanced when completing it? Well, seeing as this is a 2D Sonic game, similar to the Genesis titles, Sonic and Company must collect the 7 Chaos Emeralds to access the one true ending, which can range from adding flowers to the ending of Sonic 1 or an extra boss in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Before going into this review, my memory had recalled Sonic Advance being a pretty good but tiring experience by the end. However, on this playthrough, it wasn't as bad as I remember it actually. Maybe it was because I haven't played this game in a while, but who knows. Throughout my 5 playthroughs, there wasn't one time where I felt like I really wanted to put the controller down as the playthroughs went on. Just the individual levels that were not good, like Angel Island or Cosmic Angel. Anyway, let us finally dive into the special stages themselves. Despite the generally unpopular reputation of the special stages in the Genesis games, I never had too much of an issue with them. Except Sonic 2, I have never actually collected more than like 4 emeralds in that game. Here, getting to them in theory is not a big problem. What you have to do is find a spring in 7 levels, and then this will take you into the special stage where you attempt to get an emerald. I said in theory because getting to most of these springs as anyone other than Tails is a pain in the ass, since they're located in places that are generally more obnoxious to get to as Sonic, Knuckles, and Amy, leading to what feels like you bumbling around these levels forever, trying to get up to them. Some instances are just really hard to see clearly, seeing as the information I need to make these jumps are off screen. Many stages are not so bad with this, however when it is, it feels like a nightmare. Take Neo Green Hill Act 1 or Casino Paradise Act 1 for example. Just gonna say right now, my suggestion is to turn the 10-minute time limit off in the options menu to give yourself as much time as you need doing this garbage. However, getting 1 emerald as one character means all the characters get it, which makes sense seeing as there's only 1 set of emeralds, and so making me get them 4 times would make absolutely no sense. So point being, no shame in using Tails for most of them, seeing as that's what I did. However, the stages themselves are far more controller throwing than getting them ever could be. It has a similar concept to the special stages lazily used in almost every Sonic game. You're in a tube and you're told how many rings you need to get by the end. If you get them, then you go to the next section where you do the same thing, and by doing that, the emerald is yours. What's the problem here if it's been done to death like I suggested? Well, the depth perception is atrocious. The tubes you're falling down are incredibly wide, and so spatial awareness is an ignominious inconvenience. I can't tell where I am in context of the rings to making me miss a whole row of the damn things, which wouldn't be so bad, but the ring requirements are really steep, meaning that you can hardly avoid to miss even 1 row of them. There are springs placed around, and sometimes these set me off course, missing a ton, and the list goes on and on and on as to why these sections are terrible. Like these picky trick rings, which require split-second timing but also feel crucial to victory. Failing puts you back to the stage, and with that said, you can't try again. Why? This is not like Sonic 3 where you can find plenty more special stage rings on the way to the end. This game only has 7 springs, so I either A, keep going with the game, B, get a game over and go back to the title screen, or C, reset the system just to try again. I say that because you can't just exit the stage when returning to an already beaten stage. Again. Why? That just seems like a needless oversight, making this system severely more crippling than it already was. Beyond that though, another thing I really don't like about this game is the fact that in order to see the final boss, you have to play through the entire game as all 4 characters, even if you get all the emeralds as 1 character. My obvious argument being how Sonic 3K had 3 modes of play, not including the Sonic and Tails combo, and you didn't have to play the other 2 modes to see the finale of Sonic's campaign, which is very true, but within the game itself I just find it to be needless padding. Beating one story shows a credit sequence followed by text saying to get all the Chaos Emeralds, and so I do it as Sonic, beat the X Zone again, and then nothing happens. Why? Why do I need to play the game 3 more times only to come back to the X Zone as Sonic again, only for it to now actually mean something? Once again, while I don't really mind playing these campaigns since they feel varied enough to be interesting, however it just serves to waste time since Angel Island Zone Act 1 is not any more fun the 4th time than it was the first 3. So is it worth it to see the boss in the Moon Zone? Not really. The Moon Zone is a pretty underwhelming and easy final boss, which is most certainly not worth the blood, sweat, and tears that went into getting here, since you just ram into him a few times, ending the game. Before we close though, let's briefly discuss some of the extra content that Sonic Advance has to offer. Starting small, there's a cheat code on the character select, up right, down right, L right, R right, and then select Sonic, and then that will result in Tails following Sonic just like 2 and 3. Following that, we have the time trials, allowing you to pick any character you choose and play the level and try to beat your best time. Fairly simple stuff. Next up is the Tiny Chow Garden making its first appearance out of 3. If you played Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, then this concept should be familiar to you. Although it's called the Tiny Chow Garden for a reason. This is pretty bare. You can play minigames like Rock, Paper, Scissors and Memory to get rings, to buy fruit, and some other stuff to give to the Chow raising its stats, which is all fine and good, but I just can't bring myself to really care, honestly. I don't care in Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, and I certainly don't care about it here. Although those minigames I just listed are kind of fun. In the options menu, you have access to the sound test, which is exactly what it sounds like, and a difficulty select, which reduces the amount of hits a boss takes. Lastly is the multiplayer, which, yes, this game and all the games in this marathon have a multiplayer mode, however, there's not much going on. You and a friend, provided you have a link cable, must race your way through Sonic Advance using an assortment of weapons against one another. It's kind of fun, however, it's not something really worth playing in my opinion, especially if you don't have the link cable I said you needed. Moving along to the presentation, Sonic Advance looks fantastic. It merges the art style of the adventure games with the classic formula quite well, with some incredibly detailed and personality-filled sprites for all the characters and enemies. I love all the detail put in, like when Knuckles lands from gliding, he skids along the ground before getting up. It's that kind of thing that I love. Expect the visuals to only get better as the marathon goes along though. On a side note, I never really liked Sonic's running animation in this game. I guess the spinning just looks really awkward with this taller Sonic holding his arms behind his back, but still, later games will remedy this. Minor nitpick. The soundtrack, though, is alright. The GBA has never been known for producing very high quality music, however that doesn't mean all GBA music is bad, but generally the instrumentation leaves much to be desired in many GBA titles. This game has many pieces that are really solid, but on the whole, this soundtrack doesn't leave a lasting impression, where I feel like I need to listen to it outside of playing the game, but I will highlight some of my favorites. So that was Sonic Advance. Despite being pretty nostalgic for this game, I can clearly see why I don't revisit this very often. I enjoy the playstyles that were on offer here, however I don't find many of the levels built around them to be very captivating, and completing the game is a bit of a bitch. So while I enjoy this game and may pop it in every now and again, go through Sonic's campaign and call it a day, the game is overall just above average. A decent game, but nothing about Sonic Advance is particularly special in my opinion. And unless you're using some legally ambiguous methods, the only way you're playing this game is on a GBA cart, so if you don't own anything that plays those, I do not say that this game is worth buying a GBA or a DS for. I also do feel like it's worth mentioning how this game is getting a fan remake titled Sonic Advance Revamped in the near future. The demo is out now with a link to the channel in the description. The demo is basically just Neo Green Hill Act 1 with all the characters. The remake is adding widescreen, less dash pads, hopefully better special stages, and more characters. What could possibly go wrong? I mean, when that comes out, I'll most certainly give a review of it, since I think it has the potential to really take the place of the original Sonic Advance. But with that said, this is only the beginning of the marathon, and I look forward to the rest. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you for Sonic Advance 2.